Again, beginning with the end in mind, I want to think about some common criteria as we think about standards for modern learning environments. And what we found is often in the gap, all right? Mind the gap. Almost all modern learning environment or high impact learning environment programs first begin with a criteria of price. But one of the things that we found is that if you don't actually consider a multi-year agreement or a strategy for refreshing the agreement, for instance, maybe you are doing a modernization, maybe you're doing a remodel, and you don't have a strategy for allowing the principal or other educators, other folks in the building to continue to purchase if something breaks or they need to refresh something or whatnot. Maybe you've done a few classrooms, they want to do other classrooms. If we don't have that strategy, we found significant waste, everything is more expensive, or they start buying other things. So there's kind of a dilution of your own design vision, right? Things go back to chaos. It's kind of entropy. Another set of criteria is selection criteria. Most of the folks who are working in the environments arena will bring lots of different vendors, lots of different suppliers. What we found is that if you don't have an instructional vision that comes and alongside that broad selection, for instance, Meteor has more than 200 manufacturers, and have an instructional problem to solve. Maybe you are focused on collaboration. Maybe you are focused on accountable talk. Maybe you're focused on a specific STEM strategy. Whatever it might be, you'll end up with kind of very colorful, very nice, modern looking chaos. And that often leads to teacher frustrations. They don't understand the design vision for the new environment. There's a colleague of mine in California at a district that likes to say, all of a sudden the teachers come to their new environment and it feels like they've gone to an entirely new zip code. Literally, they went from California to Alaska and they just don't know how to live, how to teach in the igloo. And there can be no instructional impact. As a matter of fact, the instructional impact can be negative. Very oftentimes, as we're thinking about modernization programs, or maybe you have a bonding program, so we're looking at multiple year investments, if we don't actually have a plan for equity, a plan for scaling the vision from one building to many buildings, from one classroom to many classrooms, we can have resentment in our community. We actually lose board support over time. And there can be a lack of learning gains. Again, you can have chaos inside of your organization. So I'm going to be talking about how we should think about pilot classrooms, even in a first project, pilot classrooms to seed other buildings to your vision. Almost anyone in the high impact learning environment discussion is going to have an interior designer. That's kind of a given. What we found is that if you don't bring alongside an interior designer, an expert instructional designer, you're going to end up with overstuffed rooms, interior designers, and I love them. I work with a lot of them, but they get very excited about all the things. There isn't an instructional design to the pieces inside of the classroom. As a matter of fact, there could be a lack of educational coherence into that environment and a loss of teacher credibility. I have experienced this myself, going into a classroom that was new, going into a school that's been modernized, going to talk about best practices. And the educators there are like, what have you done to us? I can't even walk inside of my space. If you are an enlightened conversation in high impact learning environments, hopefully you're talking about teacher voice and you're making sure that teacher voices are included in the process. But if in teacher voice, you don't include insights into student engagement, you're not actually understanding what's going on with the kids and thinking about the students themselves, we find that there's a lack of connection from the environment to practice. Essentially what happens is that the teaching program kind of continues as it was. I can't tell you the number of times I've seen environments where really fancy new things all end up in rows again, right? A tombstone classroom. You can have quality issues and you can have increased costs. When we think about allowing schools to make their own choices, again, that would be an enlightened conversation. I hope schools have a voice in making their choice. If we lack teacher and leader training in what the design vision is, We end up with confused and irritated teachers. Again, what is this new environment I'm walking into? What am I supposed to do with this? There could be significantly increased costs of refreshing, especially if the folks didn't like what you made for them and they start making it all over again on their own. They can abandon your design vision and all the things that you've been investing in, and you can have negative learning outcomes. And lastly, we always have some kind of material specification. But if I don't have a well-building approach, and I'll speak to that in a moment, I actually can have increased materials cost without a return on attendance, and I can have sick building syndrome. So these are the standards for high impact learning environment programs that I'm going to dig into. Let's think about the problem of practice here and the results of a new learning environment. Many of us get excited. It looks nice. It looks new. My colors can match my school colors. Everything might match. Everything looks like it goes together, right? And I get a sense of community pride. But how long are things going to look nice and new? How long are they going to match? Literally, that law of entropy, the law of chaos, right? From the very first day, I have to replace something that broke. I have to replace something that I didn't think about. If I don't have a plan for that, everything starts to go away. All of the matching, all the design vision, and that sense of pride, it can actually begin to diminish almost immediately, especially, by the way, if my teachers and leaders are unhappy because they don't know what to do in that new environment. I want us to think about that for a moment. The impact of teacher confusion. If I don't have an instructional design vision that went with my interior design vision, if the teachers haven't been trained or introduced to the new environment, I want you to look at the set of 5 different kinds of stools here at the bottom of the screen. I was recently in a classroom and there were a set of these stools and they were actually on top of really large filing cabinets. And I asked the teacher, why are they up there? I said, I hate them. I don't even understand why I would use them. It's just an example. And by the way, those are really expensive. That someone, a really great interior designer, a really great process said, these will be great. They're ergonomically appropriate. I've got some energy here. I'm going to be supporting my teacher. The teachers walk into that new zip code and they're like, this is completely foreign to me. No way. What were you thinking? By the way, I want us to recognize that if we don't, at the very beginning, have a vision for scaling, have a vision for equity, some parts of our community will feel left out, right? Why does that classroom, why does that building get something new and we don't? So we want to begin from the very start to not only have a plan and a message for equity and scale, but to be able to implement equity and scale. By the way, this goes to training. It also goes to really thoughtful educational vision. A reminder that any environment can be weaponized. And I said, if you look down here at the casters, so if you get into the details, you can actually have casters on a chair that don't allow students to turn the chair or the stool into a bowling alley. But I have seen environments, and I'm sure you can imagine them if you haven't seen them, where rowdy students actually do weaponize the things that have been put into that environment. And then I can always waste time and money. And time and money tends not to be wasted in the initial project. It tends to be wasted the very next day as people are looking at either refreshing or replacing or doing something different because they don't like what you did. One of the things to consider as well is the idea of healthfulness. And I mentioned sick school syndrome. By the way, this is a really interesting documentary. You can Google it. It's out on YouTube if you want to see it. Pervasive, persistent, and expensive post-project problems, what we didn't expect. No one believes that their project that they are undertaking will lead to a sick building. The World Health Organization estimates that 30% of all new or remodel buildings have air quality issues. According to the National Education Association, about 1/3 of all schools exhibit sick school symptoms. And asthma and other respiratory issues are the #1 reason for teacher and student absence. And by the way, I could go on and on with the research. There's a set of research on dirty work surfaces. The single dirtiest, and I'm talking about pathogens, bacteria, the single dirtiest work surface of all of the work surfaces across all of the industries that were surveyed the teacher's desk. And if you just think about all of those students from all of those places plus the teacher. So we have to think about what healthfulness actually looks like. Now, this is an example of all of the different things that can lead to a sick environment. And by the way, a sick classroom can be a singular classroom. For instance, you can get something in the classroom that is activating a student. It could be activating something that they're allergic to. It could have a particularly volatile compound that you didn't know about. Any materials brought in can have a serious impact. And by the way, that's also true of things that aren't a part of the built environment. It could be bad ventilation. It could be a plant that you're bringing in, okay? But you see here everything from copiers and different kinds of inks to plants to do I have moisture coming in to the classroom, et cetera. Lots of different things can cause that sick classroom. And of course, today in the COVID era, we are especially interested in how we can prevent the cross-infection from either surfaces or humans in the environment. I want to remind ourselves that new does not equal high impact. It doesn't even really equal modern. It certainly doesn't necessarily equal college or career preparation. And I have 3 different images here to illustrate this point. Powder House is a new high school. You can actually look them up, where they're actually designing the high school to be like little workspaces so that the students that are going from high school into career or into university literally are used to collaborating with each other in a work type space, not in an environment type space. And that builds greater independence. All right. It also builds greater confidence. And interestingly enough, they found that it was easier to manage those students, even though it took some training for the teachers to think about how they operated a classroom where they didn't have students in rows. If you look over to the right in the kind of funky little pods, that's a picture of the actual Google office. One of the things that you see in high impact workspaces are places that very specifically elicit creativity. Lastly, down there, you see the person in the White Castle t-shirt. That is a robot. The robot is named Flippy. And in many of even our very basic service type industries, we now have robots, not that we're working on, I'm not necessarily programming them, but robots are actually a part of our work stream, a part of our work environment. They are our colleagues, if you will. All of these things, you would be hard pressed, except for some of our most advanced or most kind of forward-thinking school environments, to find these kinds of elements, but they are possible. I want you to also consider that the COVID era will have an impact on school designs. As a matter of fact, every previous large health event, every previous pandemic, epidemic has had an impact on architects, on the environment. For instance, and you can go out again, you can find this, the Spanish flu is the reason why you see a lot of white wipeable tile, for instance, in subways, because it was as a part of that epidemic that folks became very aware of how they can see germs and what sanitation looked like. There's a really interesting article in Slate about post-pandemic style and the impact on architects. So you see here a variety of things that we might think about in the working environment. I just want to note that our communities are going to expect some things, but the workplaces are also changing. And if we really want to be aligned in our schools, in our modern environments to what's coming, we have to be aware of the impact of COVID era design. Lastly, if you haven't seen this, I guarantee you will. Our student populations are changing. One of the things that we're seeing right now is a significant migration out of cities into suburbs and even into more rural environments. This is a statistic. During the second quarter of 2020, Realtor.com found that more than 1/2 of all property searches on the site were city residents looking to go into the suburbs. And Redfin, which is a real estate brokerage, noted the number of folks who are looking to move to a different metro area. So we can also expect, as we're thinking about our environments, we're going to have new and different kinds of kids. And frankly, some of the challenges that we see in urban environments are likely to come to our suburban and rural districts. So I want us to then consider, with that background, that context, why the standards I've already suggested to you become important and what they might look like. We begin with the idea of a goal statement for high impact learning environments. Now, this is just a suggestion, but this would be a goal statement that would align to the standards that I've suggested to you. That a high impact learning environment will be part of a plan for equity across our community. It's not a silo. It's not one classroom. It's not one building. It's not one neighborhood. It needs to be designed by educators, health and vocational experts in the intersection of education, interior design, instructional design, and healthy building design. It needs to align to modern university and workplace environments and have people to speak into that. Needs to be designed for effective collaborative learning. And by the way, collaborative learning that links back to what those new workplaces look like. Needs to align to the latest healthy environments research and includes a plan for sustained refresh. And that has a financial impact that also means that our design vision is going to continue. Now, you may have some other goal statements. And again, if you connect with Sebastian, one of the things that Meteor does is actually facilitates conversations with your stakeholders to come to your own goal statement. But this goal statement would align to the standards that I've suggested are really critical to think about. So I want you to consider then, if we begin with the idea of equity, that equity isn't just about buying things, all right? Equity isn't about just looking at things and having them look the same way. Equity begins with the teacher and student interaction, not the environment itself. And one of the ways that we can begin a vision and a plan for equity with a first project, even if literally your plan is only to modernize, only to remodel a few classrooms or a couple of media centers, is to have a plan for pilot classrooms, pilot media centers, or even pilot areas, but all across your district. As an example, in a media center, one of the things I might have in my new design would be an area where students are collaborating and presenting to each other. I could take that one area, just that one little piece, and start introducing them to the media centers across my campus. The key then isn't just that area, it's not the environment, but bringing all of my teachers or all of my media center specialists together in a centralized location for training. What you're doing is you are sharing your design vision. You are bringing a consistent message and a consistent approach for those elements out to your entire district. That's part of equity. And you can show them that you're serious. You have a plan for bringing what your new vision is out to the other spaces in your district as your budget permits. But here's one of the great things. You and I both know that buildings are doing things independently anyway, right? Look at how much money teachers spend on their own classrooms. My mom was a librarian, and in the summer, she would always have her own library spaces and things that she made or whatnot. You're sharing that vision so that the things that they're doing independently, even before you begin a program at that space in a very specific programmed way, they're already latched on, they're already sharing your vision, and they're going to implement to those standards. So again, the idea of equity beginning with interaction, doing some pilots, and it could be a pilot classroom or pilot space, and then training. And my example here is, you can actually look here. This is from YouTube, and it has a station rotation model. So if you're starting station rotation models, you might just start building some stations inside of classrooms as a model and start doing some of that training, right? Budget for one model space in each building. Include centralized training, or use your new spaces for authentic training. Bring people to your new campus. Bring people into your new spaces, all right? And then use that fully modernized space as your innovation zone. Equity is almost always going to require long-range planning. And this is one of the things that we've really found through the efforts of Meteor. Meteor specializes in helping districts put together a strategic design blueprint. This is actually something that they provide as a service at no cost. They can do an assessment of your various spaces to help you understand where those spaces are today and what it looks like 1, 3, 5 years out where you need to start refreshing. And if you go to the Meteor website, and I provided a link here, you can have the PowerPoint, you can actually go and listen to practitioners. And that's my suggestion here, to actually get connected with folks who have begun a long-term plan for equity at scale and learn from the things that they have done, like Salem Kaiser Public Schools, like Richland One. By the way, here's an example of some of the kinds of analytics that Meteor brings to bear. They actually help you understand in your different kinds of schools where the utility score is across your classrooms, which classrooms need to be prioritized, either because things might be old or non-functional, even if there's a safety hazard, or if you have a specific design vision in order to implement a specific pedagogy. All right, you don't have to start with everything at once. And the picture there in the bottom right is a real life strategic design workshop where you have a district coming together with leadership to think about, this is what we're prioritizing for our actual human engagement with kids in the classroom, and then building backwards from that. What are our standards for our new environments over time? From the idea of equity at scale, we have to think about a healthy building. So I want to dig in for just a moment, just a little bit of science. By the way, I think on the 17th of December, I'm doing a full presentation on indoor air quality to really dig into this. But I want you to understand something, that right now, in the vast majority of classrooms, actually the vast majority of buildings in the US, except for hospitals, that there is an episodic filtration strategy in the building. I take in outside air, I put it through some kind of filter or whatnot, and then I supply the air into the space. The reality is that that air, as it's moving through, it does not stop a pathogenic event. That the air itself does not stop any kind of transmission. So all of the things that are happening right now, and I'm not even talking COVID times, I'm talking about asthma, I'm talking about colds and flu. The vast majority of things that we do with that filter inside of our building systems, it doesn't stop the transmission inside of the classroom. And you can hear about, well, I'm refreshing my air every so many minutes or every so many hours. Well, those transmission events still happen. And you know that because you see kids catch colds all the time, right? By the way, in my own house, the flu was running rampant. I'm like, how did that happen? Everyone is masking. So I want to introduce to you, and again, this is something to be aware of. You can come to the 17th. At the very minimum, this should be on your list of standards for a well building. And that is photocatalyst action. So this is technology that's actually used in hospitals. And instead of just cycling air through, instead what happens is you have technology that achieves kind of a fresh air purification through something called photocatalytic oxidation. All right. Now that's a really long word, and I know that. Essentially what happens is that the air comes in to whatever kind of device that you have that you're using in the hospital, and the air is filled with, excuse me, filled with something like a hydroperoxide gas. There's something in the air that actively kills virus, that actively kills pathogens on a continuous basis. So the moment you walk into a space, that air is literally clean. And that's why you have very different kinds of air systems in hospitals than you have in other environments. But right now, we're concerned about the same thing. This technology is today available for schools. It's also now available for hotels and other kinds of places that are concerned about viruses and bacteria. Again, yeah, it could be coronavirus, but it could be the flu. It could be MRSA. It could be E. coli, mold, fungi, and yeast, or other kinds of issues. By the way, it actually kills insects and other kinds of pests in the air. And again, this is the same kind of technology that hospitals use. It's actually developed by NASA, all right? By the way, right now, the CASPER units actually reduced coronavirus by more than 93% in just 3 hours of running the unit. And obviously that's new research, but they know that bacteria, fungi, influenza, that's all significantly reduced. And that's why these units are placed inside of hospitals. But please consider, as you're thinking about whether you are remodeling, you have a new build, nobody sets out to spend millions and millions of dollars and to get a sick building. Indoor air quality is the single leading factor for kids and teachers being out of school. So we have to consider that this is a critical part of a standard for a high impact learning environment. If I'm not in the environment, I'm not going to learn. Okay. So we talked about equity at scale. We talked about a well building. I want to think about collaboration. Now, collaboration is an easy word, but it's not so easily done. And it's certainly not so easily done if I'm thinking about alignment to the real world. All right. I don't know how many of you have been in a modern work environment. Well, you have been because you're at home, right? Many of you are probably at home on Zoom, modern work environment. But office spaces, many of them look very similar to the kind of office space you see on your screen. Now, this is actually a space. This is a real life high school class designed as a part of the Incubator EDU project. And in this project, what they're doing is they're doing entrepreneurship coursework, and they actually build out spaces with the help of designers, for instance, from Silicon Valley. You can have designers who literally work in transportation, in healthcare. I was just in California. Well, I shouldn't say just, it was before COVID hit. And we were meeting with the district, and they wanted to make sure that one particular kind of space in high school looked like real law enforcement type space because they had a lot of kids in their law enforcement program. My point is this: collaboration is moderated by the space itself, the kind of collaboration that happens. And if you want students to have the kinds of skills they need for specific workplaces, you have to have that workplace design to speak into what you're designing in your high impact learning environment. This is another kind of environmental design where I'm thinking about collaboration in a different way. This is actually a design for a space outside of Dallas, Texas. And here, this is part of a leadership academy where all of the participants were actually boys. They were all minority children, actually, and almost all of them have been in trouble. And this space is actually designed where the students begin working in very small groups, like literally paired up, and you kind of see that at the bottom. And they're presenting to each other. They're always presenting in the curriculum. And then they go to groups of 2 to 3 to 4. Then they work into a small group. There are spaces if someone is kind of acting out or they're overstimulated, they need a little bit of time. There are quiet times. And finally, every single quarter, the students work up to that big dais, that big pedestal, and they give a presentation to the entire class. I'm sure that you can understand this space is working on my ability to speak, my ability to listen, my ability to collaborate, but it's also working on essential social and emotional literacy skills and building student self-confidence. This is called a pro-social classroom. One of the things that I would suggest is that when you think about the standards, like I said, everyone's going to have a requirement for interior design. But is there trained instructional design? There's something called ALEP. That is an accredited learning environment planner. For instance, I am ALEP. There are only a few hundred ALEP certified folks in the world, but they look at things differently. So for instance, if you look at these two pictures, I might ask you, what do you see here? Well, you might say, well, the one on the right looks, it's pretty modern, but also kind of standard. The one on the left, it looks like they have some funky desks at least. A trained, accredited learning environment planner is going to see things like, is there flexibility? Even over in that lower right-hand side, I don't see a lot of flexibility in seating. Looks like everyone has the same chair. Is there flexibility in lighting? What if you have students, and by the way, this is very common, who are more impacted? They're affected by different kinds of light. Is there flexibility in heating? Is there space to spread out? Are there a soft seating? Is there a seating? Is there a nook to go into if I need to be alone? Having a accredited learning environment planner, someone who's actually bringing instructional design to the party with an interior designer, is absolutely critical. Otherwise, you will, as my friend Bill Latham likes to say, end up with a taco chip shaped desk and no improvement in learning, and you can even have a negative impact. I'm going to give you an example of two different environments that have been explicitly designed for different kinds of spaces and different kinds of flexibility. So this is obviously an elementary classroom. I have spaces here. If a student needs to go and have a little bit of alone time, they can back in that corner. This is eminently flexible. I have lots of different kinds of chairs and seating. I have lots of different spaces. I can do almost anything here, including an intervention space with a little round table in the corner. Lots of things that I can do. The same way here, this is Atlantic High School in Volusia County, Florida. This was actually designed for a specific curriculum. They started with the curricula and they designed outward. And in that curricula, they were asking what were the kinds of activities that they were going to do? How did they want their students to come together and work? So for instance, they have places where they can do their laptops and they can work independently. They can take assessment independently. They can work collaboratively together. Those are the task desks that you see there, the desks that look like clouds. They can present to each other. This room was designed with a pedagogy that specifically meets a criteria and a curriculum that they were implementing. Also, that person who is a skilled learning environment planner is going to ask, are we thinking about different kinds of physical needs? Ergonomically correct. By the way, ergonomically correct doesn't mean you have to have one of those funky stools, but it does mean that you have to have flexibility so that, for instance, when a student is sitting, I don't restrict the blood flow literally to their brain. That actually happens. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. One of the things that happens in a sick building is that kids get tired, teachers get tired, their backs gets tired. If you've ever been in a bad chair, do I have a low energy or a high energy in the space? Am I providing tools for the teacher to actually provide a little bit lower energy when kids are bouncing off the wall to higher energy? What's the light look like? What are the independent spaces and the collaborative spaces? These are very specific design elements that you're not going to get simply because someone understands interior design and they can do a color palette and they can put lots of different interesting, funky things into a space. One of the examples of that I want to draw your attention to is the difference in height. And here you see this is actually a set of kind of specifications and recommendations for chair height and table height. But one of the things that's become super important, especially in our communities where I have folks from a lot of different countries. So for instance, in my own family, my two youngest children were born in Guatemala. Now, if you know anything about Central America, you know that my children are significantly shorter than children that would be born in the United States. My oldest son, for instance. So actually having flexibility, because the range of height, literally the range of bodies in my classrooms is really dramatically changing. This is simply another element that I have to think through that should be on your standard specification. And by the way, in my example here in the picture with the little kind of D-shaped desks, this is from Sarasota, Florida. That collaboration is more than just conversation, that I actually want to think about how many students are together collaborating in this space. I actually can't get more than 5. All of the students are equidistant from what's happening in the middle of the space, and that was important for them. And you'll notice the screen there, what they did, and they don't have a lot of technology. They were not one-to-one. This collaborative space is designed for students to be able to take information in from the computer, but also to present to each other using the computer in a very modern workspace type method. And their results, by the way, their actual results on standardized tests in Florida, through the roof. So we talked about equity at scale. We talked about a healthful building. We've given some thought to what collaboration standards might look like. I want to think about the inside of the student now, not just the inside of the environment. Because as I said, if I think about teacher voice and how teachers see themselves and their kind of activity and what collaboration looks like and the curriculum, but I don't actually think about the students and what's happening with them, I don't ever realize actual impact for those students. I need to have a way to measure the students' engagement in real time in that space so that I can intervene in that engagement. And this becomes super important if I'm going to centers, if I have different kinds of spaces in my classroom. I may have a student that's not going to do well in an independent space. I might have a student who's not going to do well collaborating today. So I want us to think here, and I'm just going to give an example of what I call the wounded learner. So first of all, our youth are at some of the greatest risks from mental health problems. I don't need to tell you this is something that everyone is concerned about, even more so right now. But before COVID happened, we were concerned about what was happening inside of the minds and hearts of our students. And you know that as well as I do. Everything from sleep deprivation, that's especially true in our kids who are in secondary, substance abuse, self-harm, eating disorders, anxiety disorders. Interestingly enough, anxiety disorders can be especially prevalent in the lower grades, all different kinds of emotional challenges. And those challenges manifest differently in different kinds of environments, all right? For instance, if I'm in an environment where I'm just sitting all day, I might react differently than an environment where I'm off on my own, or I have a lot more freedom and I might be able to punch someone, all right? So when I think about students and their challenges in the classroom, maybe I can see what's going on, but oftentimes the unseen, the unheard barrier is what's holding me back. It's what's holding my teacher back. My environment can help that, or my environment can hinder that. But the environment is never neutral. And that's why this has to become a standard as I'm thinking about the environmental design. One of the things that I suggest is asking, is my environment actually designed for constant, continuous check-in with my students? All right. So one of the things that I recommend is I recommend emoji-based systems that ask students on a regular basis at the beginning of class, if they're switching classes during the day, how does your body feel today? Are you sick, injured, hungry? Maybe you're aching. How's your social life going? How are you for collaboration today? Are you having conflict? Are you having disagreement? You feeling good? How's your energy? If you're low energy, you're exhausted or tired, actually it can be beneficial to put you in a collaborative space. If you're completely feeling hyper and out of control, I might have you doing some independent work today as a way to center you. The idea here is almost like a social emotional X-ray to see what's going on in the inside environment of the student. So for instance, one of the organizations that I work with is an organization called Rhythm. We can actually set you up with a demo of this that goes hand in hand with your environmental design to think about how can I measure the students' engagement, and depending upon those measures, how am I actually going to use the environment? What kinds of tools am I giving my teacher so that my teacher can manage the different kinds of students that show up? Because I don't know about you, and I know some would probably accuse me of having 10 different personalities. I don't. I think it's only 3. But you're different on different days. And the environment becomes a really important way of helping you continue to be an effective learner if I know what's going on. By the way, this is an example right in the middle of the screen of something called Rhythm Insights. It actually tells you, you can see which students are hungry. There's an alerting system, which students are self-reporting, and there's kind of something really serious happening. But most importantly, that student who's walking in the classroom, in literally about a 30-second check-in, you can know, should the student be in a collaborative space? Should they work one-on-one with you? Do you need to intervene there? Do your kids need a little bit of exercise? Do they need to, kind of, I think about it as off-gassing, get rid of some of that energy? Or do you have a student that needs to just be in a quiet space because of where they're at today? Collaboration is truly by design. It's not only the environment, it's not only what's happening with the student, but it's also what's happening with the teacher. And teachers, not only where they're placed in the environment, but how they're taught to use and operate in the environment, impact collaboration significantly. The diagram on your screen is from a study. This is actually from the University of Minnesota. And it looked at teacher placement in a pro-social environment where the teacher was in the middle of the space. And you see that many of the students, this is obviously a large college classroom, had their backs to the teacher. And what they found was the teachers did a lot less lecturing, because it's hard to lecture and be the sage on the stage when you are in the middle of the room. There was more conversation. There was more coaching. The teacher was actually better able to monitor what students were happening because they were equidistant to the students. They could reassure. They were better able for someone who was having a challenge to, for instance, put their hand on their shoulder. Super important to think about how we have a teacher station in the teacher desk and what the teacher footprint is. And I would tell you from the folks at Meteor, one of the single most important conversations they have is what's the teacher footprint? And they're always fighting about that. By the way, in this example, did you see the teacher desk? There wasn't one. The teacher is always rotating here, always operating around that classroom. So I've suggested to you that as you're thinking about either a newly built environment or remodeled environment, if you want it to be a high impact learning environment, there are a set of standards that you should be considering. Making sure that you have a plan for equity across the community that should have some kind of pilot space, pilot classroom or media center in every building so everyone gets a taste. But then bring people together, because equity is about what teachers are doing with kids. It isn't just about the environment. So everyone has that vision. Making sure that we have instructional design experts, health experts, vocational experts speaking into the design, not just someone who's a local interior designer who understands colorways. And by the way, I love interior designers, but I am an educator and I have a more complex environment and a more complex set of operations happening in that environment that might be happening somewhere else. I need to align to modern university and workplace environments. I need to think about really effective collaborative learning in a variety of settings, including, by the way, what do I know about the students' engagement? Can I measure it? What kind of insight do I have? Do I know how to use the tools in my environment? Or is my teacher just going to be frustrated? I'm done. I don't know what to do here. I went from California and I walked into Alaska and I don't like it at all. And by the way, that's going to be more expensive over time, right? And then aligning to those latest healthy environments research, especially related to indoor air quality, and thinking about really continuous indoor air quality, not something that's episodic. And lastly, is there a plan for sustained refreshing? If you have a multi-year agreement, if you have a contract, everyone knows this is the vision. This is how to go out. This is how to get a replacement, something. Everything aligns to the vision. And by the way, everything should be at the lowest possible cost. That's a restatement of what those standards are. If you're interested in the white paper, if you would like the full rubric, if you would actually like to have Meteor come in and work with you, just have conversation around what your spaces might look like or how to evaluate them, you can contact Sebastian Sanchez at Meteor Education. You can contact me. I'll make sure that everyone gets the PowerPoint from the presentation. Study yourself out at meteoreducation.com. They actually have a solution analyzer. You can go in and put in information, and they have a lot more research as well. And then lastly, December 17th, we're going to really dig into the indoor air quality, if that is a concern for you, the idea of a well building versus a sick building. And that is the presentation for today. Thank you so much for being here. And I actually took more time than I thought. So I see we have the registration link. Excellent. Michael, everyone, back to you.